Hi, everyone. This is Erin Robinson from the Center for the Study of Social Policy. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar about financing strategies, tax-based financing strategies in early childhood. We'll be starting in about 5 minutes. so it looks like it's 2 p.m. Eastern Time, so we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Robinson with the Center for the Study of Social Policy, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Local Early Childhood Financing Strategies, Examples from Two Communities. First, we'll have Anne-Marie Valdez, President and CEO of First Steps Kent County in Kent County, Michigan, and she'll describe how the county passed a ballot initiative that funds early childhood services through a millage tax. After that, Randy Palo, Director of Program at the Children's Services Council of Palm Beach County in Florida, will discuss the successful ballot initiative that established his organization and the role it plays as a local funder of early childhood services in the county. And just a bit of housekeeping before we get started, please feel free to ask questions during the session in the chat box that is provided for questions. Also, feel free to press the button that allows you to show your hand is raised. So we won't have questions between Anne-Marie and Randy's presentations, but we'll have a full about 30 minutes for questions at the end. But feel free to write them in the chat box whenever. And with that said, I will pass it over to Anne-Marie to get us started.
Thank you, Erin. Just thrilled to be able to do this presentation, and also so excited that Randy Palo is a co-presenter, because I would just say that Palm Beach County has been a great mentor to Kent County, and I see that running throughout CSSP EC-LINC work, that communities take other communities under their wing and help us go through this process together. So with that, I'll get started. Kent County is home to Grand Rapids, which is the second largest city in the state of Michigan. I'd say we have almost a 700,000 population with 22 school districts that all fall under one umbrella of an independent school district that covers all of those. Grand Rapids is a large urban center, and our region is one of the fastest growing in the U.S. On November 6th...
Hi, Anne-Marie. So sorry to interrupt. If anybody is not on mute, could you please mute yourself? I think we're hearing some background noise, so I just want to make sure we're good.
Thanks, Erin. So on November 6, 2018, Kent County voters passed a ballot initiative that created a new dedicated sustainable funding source for early childhood programs through a millage, and that's what we call it here, but it's really a property tax increase. And that millage increase was about 0.25 for every $1,000 of taxable value on property, and that millage will run from 2019 to 2024, which at that point we will be able to go for a renewal, and that was all approved by our County Board of Commissioners. So to give you an idea, a Kent County homeowner with an average home value of $150,000 will pay just under $19 a year. So just giving you a little bit of a perspective.
Hey, Anne-Marie.
Yep.
Anne-Marie.
Yes.
Hi. This is Ngazi from CSSP. I just wanted to make sure that you are speaking right into the microphone, because you sound muffled and far away.
Okay.
So I didn't want. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me know if this is better.
A little. It sounds like there's a lot of background. Maybe, are you on speakerphone?
No, I'm just doing the laptop.
Oh, that could be it. Okay. So there's a lot of background, and I think it might have to do with your audio. And we can hear you, but it's a little difficult to make out. So I don't want you to get so far in that it's hard for anybody to hear. So I wonder if could you call in?
Sure.
And do you have the number and the credentials to dial in by phone?
If you can send it, that would be great. I'm not sure if I have it, but I'll try to pull up what you guys sent.
And then maybe what we could do, Randy, if you feel ready, we could have you go, and then we can get Anne Marie all squared away, and then have her just, follow you instead.
Yeah, I'm ready to go if everybody can hear me. I'm ready to go if everybody can hear me.
Okay, so Anne Marie, why don't you go ahead and disconnect, and we'll make sure we get you your numbers so you can dial in by phone, and then we'll proceed with Randy.
Okay, so I'm hoping everybody can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay. One of the big differences, I believe, between our two presentations is I kept mine a little bit broader because we were sort of forerunners here in Palm Beach County of an effort that is available to any county in the state of Florida. And so that's why I simply titled it Children's Services Councils of Florida. Very happy as well to be speaking with Anne Marie. I know it's very exciting what's going on in Michigan and other places in the country, and we are very happy to share our experiences as well. As far as I know, and I was actually hoping to hear more of Anne Marie's to see if I had to hurry up and change this first bullet, but I believe we are still the only state that has a law that allows the creation of local governments with a sole purpose of investing in children's services. So if anybody knows I'm wrong about that, please send me a note, and I will not say that anymore. But as far as I know, we still are the only state. So one thing that's different than maybe if you're not in the state of Florida and you are looking into doing this, one of the differences with Florida is that it kind of started with a state law that allowed the creation. So it's kind of a template for how you would set up a local funding source in your county. 9 counties have created Children's Services Councils. 8 of them Was I the only one hearing a feedback?
No, we were too, and I just muted it.
Oh, okay. So there's 9 counties that have created councils, 8 of them that have the independent taxing authority. That'll make a little more sense when in a couple slides here. And I also wanted to include the website of an organization called the Florida Children's Council, which is, for the most part, a compilation of the different children's services councils here in Florida that have a state office. And their website, the web address is on this slide. I understand everybody will have a copy of this slide, and you may want to check out their website for some of the background and some of the details. So basically, it's kind of a 3-tiered process of how we were created and how others could be created now. So it started with a state law that allowed the creation of CSCs. And for those of you that might be very legal oriented, I went ahead and put the actual Florida statute, if you wanted to look it up. That actually would lays out the law that allows a special taxing district to be created for children's services. What actually happened was there had been a local effort done in Pinellas County, Florida, which is over in the Tampa area, for something called the Juvenile Welfare Board way back in the 1940s. And then in the 80s, it was actually children advocates here in Palm Beach County. And for those of you that don't know Palm Beach County, the major city would be West Palm Beach. And so we are just north of Fort Lauderdale, which is just north of Miami. So South Florida, but not as far south as Miami. So it was actually advocates from our county that wanted to see about creating something similar to the Juvenile Welfare Board, and started at kind of the top by having the state law created. So once that law was created, then any county, we were the first to do it, could then go to their county commission and ask for the creation of a special taxing district. These are actually quite common in Florida, special taxing districts. We have districts that manage our water, which of course is very important to us here in Florida, and other special districts. We have one in our county for healthcare. So they are actually kind of a somewhat common occurrence in the state of Florida to have these special taxing districts. So what was different, of course, was this one was devoted to children's services. So the county commission has to create the entity, and then you go for a voter referendum for the authority to have the tax. So it's kind of a 3-step process. So just kind of the background a little bit. So our funding source is a separate property tax. That's what the referendum is for. Most of the Children's Services Councils, if you're following the state law with no changes whatsoever, you have a 10-member board. There are some variations on this. I know for sure Miami-Dade Children's Trust is their name, has quite a different composition of their board. But for the most part, if you set it up just following the state law, it's a 10-member board. 5 are appointed by the governor, and 5 are ex officio, or basically because of the position they hold. And I listed those: school superintendent, there has to be a judge, the head of our local child welfare system, and then the county commission chooses somebody, and the school board chooses somebody. The decisions, though, of our board are independent in that they're not a recommendation to the county commission. They're not a recommendation to a state agency. They're not a recommendation to anybody. Their decisions are final. When they pass their budget, that is the final budget. When they decide to fund something or decide to do something, we proceed to do it. And all of the councils in Florida have focused their investments on prevention and early intervention. That is a choice that the councils make. The only restriction is that the services have to be for children and families. But most, I believe all, have chosen to focus on prevention and early intervention. So how you would start something like this? Now, I have to disclose that we were started over 30 years ago, and I've been here a very long time, but not long enough to say I was here when we were actually created. So I did have to refer to some notes from others on how that process actually occurred, and I have spoken with some other people in counties in Florida that have been much more recent. But usually what it starts with is what is similar to what happened here. Is usually a local group of child and family advocates is usually the starting point. And often what you want to do is collect data that shows your local needs, what the issues are, and what the trends are. So you have facts to back up what you're advocating for. You also then want to, usually early on, identify champions with influence, is how I referred to it. So sometimes people who are child advocates aren't in positions where they're wielding a lot of influence. And what you usually want to do is have some major influencers involved and backing you up. Typically, those would be business leaders, politicians. It's very important for children's issues to always have support of your education leaders, particularly your school district, or in many places that would be school districts. Even some of your local universities. Often very quickly, the issue when you're trying to do something for children, the easiest thing people often relate that to is school and how well they're doing in school. Now, one of our restrictions is that our funds cannot be used to fund the school district for education purposes. We fund them to do certain other things like childcare programs and so forth, but it is not intended to be a alternative funding source of your school system and your education system. But it is important, especially this concept of prevention and early intervention, to have educators saying how important that is for kids to start kindergarten ready for school, for example, or the influence of after school programs on children's education and attendance, those kind of things. And then you want to form a campaign committee. So typically this is actually a formal political action committee, something that can raise money. In Florida, we have restrictions, and I'm sure there are some in other states, on who can form a committee like that. Often government organizations, for example, your county commission, if they were really the ones that wanted to see something like this, often some of the people who work for the county cannot participate in that kind of a campaign. So this does need to be those champions with influence and the child advocates that really set up these campaign committees. And then I just listed a few. I know the person that led the campaign back when we were started, and also when we went back to referendum a few years ago. I had a chance to talk to her, and she identified some of the committees that they formed were things like public relations and having a speakers bureau. So there was a cadre of people who could go out and speak on behalf of the council. Fundraising, of course, if you want to do do a whole lot of campaigning, there is money that's necessary. Volunteers, and then it's always good to have some good, strong legal advice. One of the things that can come in handy there is the language that might be needed to be approved by your county commission, or the language that needs to be on a ballot is often, can be very technical sometimes, and you want to have some legal advice. So if you have a committee, or once you have a committee, what are some of the steps that you want to do? One of the first things is to gauge the support of your elected officials, because you can have, it's not always going to be universal that starting a new government organization with its own taxing authority is necessarily going to be seen in a good light by all of your local elected officials. They could even see it as a challenge or creating problems for them. So that's one of the first things you want to do, is make sure, in our case, for example, a county commission, you'd want to gauge the support of the county commissioners. They, of course, are going to have to actually approve an ordinance to create the council in the first place. So if you don't have support there, you're kind of wasting your time. But you also would want to gauge the support of mayors of your cities and various other elected officials. You also might want to do some research on whether there's been similar issues asking for tax dollars, or even other kinds of fees, or anything that raises funds, whether those have passed or not, and why they didn't pass, or why they did pass, why not. And then also gauging general public support. If you actually have the funds for it, if you've raised the funds for it, I know some of the counties will do polling, and will gauge the general public support for this kind of an entity to be created, their comfort with a tax or a fee. You can gauge different levels of support depending on the way it's presented and what it's presented to support. And so then you want to, based on that, develop different kinds of selling points, or different kinds of parts to your campaign. For example, I know in our area, often when you're talking to the business community, it's very good to put an emphasis on return on investment, the return on investment of prevention and early intervention services, and the savings in other areas. For seniors, often safety and security is the issue that you would want to emphasize by providing things like after-school programs or mentoring programs, et cetera, et cetera. It keeps kids off the street is often something that you might hear from seniors. And then, other kinds of campaigns based on that research that would be about your own local area. You want to communicate to all populations if possible. So when you're really dividing up who's doing what among a committee, you really want to try to not leave out groups or take any groups for granted. This again was advice I heard from the person that led our campaigns, was to make sure you're reaching out to all groups, because there is often a bottom line discomfort with a tax or a fee or creating a government organization. There's a whole storyline sort of government being bad, so why would we want to grow it? And so that can be in groups that otherwise do support children and do support other issues. So you want to make sure you're communicating to all populations. And then the last was avoiding opposition, which of course seems very obvious, but I know we had to go back to the voters with a referendum to continue our existence a few years ago. We had 85% support to continue. And actually the tax is a little higher here in Palm Beach County than it is in the other counties. So we had 85%, and a big part of that was that nobody came out in opposition of us. Even people that we knew and organizations that we knew were maybe not entirely comfortable or supportive or wanted to be vocal about that support, they at least didn't start a campaign that was against us. And so if there's ways to avoid that by having conversations with people or easing people's concerns, it's an effort well spent to spend that time trying to answer their questions, and again, at least at minimum, maybe reaching a middle ground that they aren't going to campaign against you actively. So that's really what I had. Hopefully you're seeing the end of my slide.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much, Randy. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll have time for questions after both presentations. So Anne Marie, are you good to go? Just checking in. So sorry about the technical difficulties earlier. Are you on the
Hey,
line,
no worries. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Oh, you sound crystal clear.
Oh, great. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. And I'll just switch it over so that we can see your PowerPoint.
Yeah, great. Do that now. Okay.
So feel free to take it away.
Okay. Thanks everybody for bearing with. And it actually was kind of cool to hear Randy's presentation because just, you know, I might have started off this way. We learned so much from Palm Beach County, and everything that they did leading the way really helped us kind of set the course for what we wanted to do to get an early childhood millage passed here in Kent County. So to get started, Kent County is home to Grand Rapids, which is the second largest city in the state of Michigan and one of the fastest growing regions in the U.S. Their population here is almost 700,000. We have 22 school districts under one umbrella, and as I mentioned, Grand Rapids is our large urban center. On November 6, 2018, the Kent County voters passed a ballot initiative that created sustainable funding for early childhood programs through a millage, which is a property tax. And what I will say is it was the first of its kind in Michigan. The millage increases taxes, and it's a 0.25 mil for every 1,000 of taxable value on a house. So for instance, like a house that is valued at about $150,000, that homeowner would pay just under $19 a year. And the millage is expected to generate approximately $5.7 million each year for 6 years. So some of the bold actions that First Steps, my organization, took really to build up toward this mission, this millage effort. And what I will say is we really, as an organization, tried to work at a systems level. And so some of the things that we did with our county administration was to develop a Kent County community plan for early childhood. We also used local university, Grand Valley State University, to help us publish some early childhood indicators so that we would have baseline data. And that started in about 2011. We also released a report in 2012, and it was a gap analysis for early childhood. But we also did another one, and I'll reference it later, but we did an updated revised gap analysis in 2017. Starting in 2011, we began measuring voter perceptions to determine the understanding of the community and support for early childhood. We also developed and are implementing a strategic communications plan, and we are noted to be the advocacy organization for early childhood here in Kent County. We have been a key influence in the state of Michigan, and especially for the expansion of the Great Start Readiness Program, which is publicly funded preschool for vulnerable 4-year-olds, and we have that statewide now. It's about a $256 million line item in our state budget. First Steps also launched demonstration projects when there was no entity locally that could actually house them. We no longer house them, but they are all going strong. And the 3 demonstration projects I would mention are the Children's Healthcare Access Program, Early Learning Communities, which is now at our Grand Rapids Community College. And the Early Learning Communities is a play and learn group that really happens throughout Grand Rapids and in many school locations, libraries, and churches. And we also did a Welcome Home Baby project that is now housed at HealthNet West Michigan. So when we considered an early childhood millage, we did polling in 2015 that showed there would be support, but that we needed to do a better job in terms of educating the community. So with funding from the Kellogg Foundation, we were able to do an education campaign countywide and to really try to build support for early childhood. We did more polling in 2018 and focus groups that really showed we had strong support. But I think Randy mentioned this as well. When you think about going for something like this and you think about opposition, our focus groups really looked at the folks that said they would never vote for an early childhood millage, and learning from those focus groups really helped us with our messaging. We hired a local communications firm to implement that aggressive education campaign and to build public will. And we reached out to other communities like Palm Beach County and a few others, especially with our connection with CSSP and EC-LINC, which I feel gives us a wealth of connection to those who have gone before us, really to learn from, and those communities that have had early childhood tax initiatives passed. So some of the key strategies, and as I mentioned, a lot of this sustained effort started in 2011. In 2017, we launched the research that we found in our gap analysis. So we had a community breakfast for about 150 stakeholders throughout the county, many elected officials and funders, to really help them understand where the largest gaps were. And as I mentioned, we did more polling in 2018. And we, as an organization, needed to create a millage subcommittee. And when I say that, it's really trying to find the stakeholders, the power brokers. We sometimes called them the titans who could win influence and bring funders on board for the actual campaign for the ballot initiative. And as a group, we targeted November 2018, that election. And with the polling, it showed that that would be the election where we would be most likely to succeed. We did identify the need, and we found that there were almost 45,000 children under age 5, and that we weren't reaching as many of those kids that we needed to, that we lacked local dedicated funds to support early childhood development and health. And there were not sufficient funds federally, statewide, or even private foundations could not cover that gap. So when we launched the campaign, we called it Yes, Ready by 5. And the big goals that we presented to our county commission were really what is illustrated here, that babies are born healthy, that children are healthy, thriving, and developmentally on track from birth to 3rd grade, that children are developmentally ready to succeed in school at the time of kindergarten entry. And one aside I'll mention now is that we finally, as a state, we have a kindergarten entry consistent test that's going to be used right now throughout our region, but eventually statewide, and it's called the KEO. It's the Kindergarten Entry Observation Test. And we wanted to make sure that children throughout Kent County are supported and prioritized. Something I'll mention about the importance of media and coordinating that is the earned media that we did, and really the learning for our organization is that in a political campaign, really the most money and the most energy is spent in the last 2 months. So the kickoff of the ballot initiative officially was really Labor Day of 2018. So we had 2 strong months of really doing a heavy political campaign for making sure that this ballot initiative was successful. And so some of the things I would say that our firm that we hired to do this work, they made sure that there were op-eds illustrating the importance of early childhood. We formed a partnership with our local public radio and our national public radio, where they were doing weekly segments on early childhood. It just happened to be something they were really interested in doing, and they were actually getting pressure from their national organization, NPR, to say that it was really important to partner with early childhood programs. So I would urge anyone on the call, if you haven't thought about it, that it might be something you could investigate. Not only is it like free earned, that earned media, but it also helps raise awareness throughout the community. And then we got tremendous amount of coverage on election day itself. So some of the things that we had to do was really illustrate the need and to make sure that we gave proposed allocations of what we would do with this millage funding. So this slide kind of shows what we learned from our gap analysis, where we could possibly move the needle. And one of the most important pieces is bullet number 1, navigation and referral. And the reason that is so important is, as a community, we realized after doing surveys and really meeting with so many of our stakeholders, the issue for our families and for our parents with young children was navigation, and that we didn't necessarily, as a full-on community, have a no wrong door approach. And we had many entities in our community who tried to do navigation, but it was definitely segmented and compartmentalized. So the first round of funding has already been RFP'd out, and we decided to do the first round of funding from these millage funds on navigation and outreach, so that we can firm up that infrastructure and that systems level work, so that when we start funding actual programs, families will be able to get referred right where they need to be, and that we do have that no wrong door approach. So that was essential to make sure that our County Board of Commissioners and the voters understand that navigation and outreach is super important. We also put an emphasis on developmental screenings, home visiting, and play and learn groups. And so all of this was what we proposed to our county that we would do with these funds. And then some of the lessons that we learned, we hired an outside strategic communications firm that took us through the entire campaign. So they were on board for a year prior to the actual election. And this top bullet saying trust your firm is so important, because if you've never done a political campaign before, there are so many uncertainties. It's very easy to get jitterish and have your top leadership or your funders get a little skittish about when are you going to do such and such. And it's so important to bring on a firm that you trust and know that they'll see you all the way through. We were very fortunate that we were successful, but I think that the unknowns can be very terrifying during a campaign. The other key lessons was building a strong coalition of funders and supporters, people who could write checks to help that campaign along, and making sure that we had a realistic campaign budget and we stuck to it. And the last bullet about engaging grassroots and grass tops, we really couldn't have done this campaign without all the folks who came, helped support, and also put out yard signs and did a speakers bureau about what we were, getting ready to put on the ballot. So all of those things were super important. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie and Randy, for both of these really engaging conversations. And so right now we're going to open it up for questions. I know we already have a few. So what I'll do is I'll start us off with a question, and then everyone who's attending, feel free to write a question in the question box, chat box, or press the button to raise your hand and we'll unmute you so you can ask. But I'll get us started with a question. So for both Anne Marie and Randy, are there any specific messages that really resonated with voters? And Randy, I know your Children's Services Council was formed a long time ago, but were there any messages that that resonated with voters recently when they had to reapprove it?
I can.
Well, yes,
Yeah,
definitely. Although, as I think both Anne-Marie and I mentioned, you want to really use some polling information to kind of determine that at a real local level. So the couple that I mentioned, the return on investment, on what you're gaining by investing in children at a young age. So the prevention of things that people see in the newspaper all the time, the prevention of child abuse, the prevention of juvenile delinquency, of kids dropping out. That was a very strong message for us, as well as the impact on school. So the impact of prevention and early intervention, for example, early childhood education on later third grade reading, for example. So and playing up school readiness, that kids starting kindergarten ready for school. Those were very strong messages this time. But again, you really want to kind of poll and figure out what is important in your community. I know when we were first created, the big issue at that time was child abuse. And in fact, of our 4 goals, 2 of them are the exact same as Anne-Marie, kids being ready for school, kids being born healthy. But but one of the other ones that's kind of a legacy from when we were first created is the prevention of child abuse. And that was the big issue back in the 1980s when we were created. And I know at that time, some of their campaign messages were much more geared towards child abuse and preventing child abuse.
So I would agree with everything Randy said. And the one that we learned from the focus groups was, what about the parents? So it was really essential that we said we're supporting parents, not replacing parents. So that was a tagline that we used quite often because it came up everywhere. And the other one that came from the focus groups was that really resonated with people was kids that start ahead, stay ahead.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think in the if I can just add also, I think in the again, maybe sort of comparing the 1980s, which for some of you is probably a very long time ago, to now. I think one of the differences too was back, I believe when we were started, you could campaign on how you were helping people who needed help. Where now I think there's less sort of compassion by at least a large part of the general population for people who are needy. There's more of this, build yourself up by your own bootstrap. And so much more of the campaign messages, I believe this time around, were much more about how everybody was going to benefit by what we were doing and how everybody needed to be ready for school. And it was less so about specific sort of issues and people with specific needs being helped. And I think that was, again, just the kind of environment that you're in, engaging that environment.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We had a question come in from Debbie Ham, and she says, and Anne-Marie, I think this one's for you, but Randy, if you have info on this as well, how was your campaign funded?
So our campaign was funded almost completely by large, generous, either philanthropists, humanitarians locally, and then to a small degree, the grassroots, some small donations, but the majority were large checks written by philanthropists locally.
And I believe for us that's the same. It was large donors. Now, of course, by the nature of our name, most of you probably do know where we are. We're near Palm Beach, so we do have some people here who can write very large checks. And so it only took a few individuals to already have a sort of pot of funds. When we went back for a re-election, we actually had to make sure that there was actually no official involvement by any of the staff due to a state law that was passed a few years ago that you could not, in other words, you could not campaign for your own existence. So it had to be done by private citizens.
That's interesting. Okay, so we have another question for you, Randy. You mentioned finding a champion And do you have any tips on finding a champion when you're dealing with something like increasing someone's taxes or keeping a tax in place?
Well, I would, again, not personally having done it, but seeing how it was done, I would say the focus is often on the business community. So if you have, now we actually kind of suffer, I guess, in a way by not having actually very many large corporations. But I know often there are, in most places, there are business groups, whether it's a chamber of commerce or maybe name something else, that often has almost a corporate level, participants. And if you can get a group like that to say that they understand the return on investment of investing in young children, and what the long-term savings of that is, that often carries a lot of weight. They can get the word out through their own companies, their own employees. They can get the word out through people who do business with them. Large businesses like that have a lot of influence that really trickles out. They can do lots of things to support you that don't even cost that much money. So I would say and when I think of sort of the opposite of who would you not want to be supporting you, I would think in most areas it would be pretty hard to pass something without some significant business support. So that would be the main one. Other than that, it would be kind of almost going back to the last question, having not only someone who's a very vocal and good speaker who supports you, but a few people that also could write checks so that you actually can hire firms like the one Anne Marie had mentioned. We also did that, I believe, in both campaigns. We also did hire firms that were very savvy in the political aspect of running a campaign. So you do need, again, some supporters that could write checks. So you would want to look at your local philanthropists, whether they do it through their foundation or they do it, personally.
So another question has come in, and it asks, what outcomes are you hoping to see as a result of the funding that's been generated through the public support? So I guess put another way, what kinds of data do you think the voters want to see over time that would cause them to come back and support such an initiative in the future?
Well, I think, as we both mentioned, we have overall goals. So you would probably start with how you would actually know that you have made an impact on healthy births or on school readiness. So Anne Marie mentioned already they have a test. We also have a kindergarten readiness test. There's various ways of measuring healthy births. One of them that obviously kind of really gets people's attention is the infant mortality rate. It's often hard to show an improvement in infant mortality, but we have shown that improvement here in Palm Beach County. So obviously a little different for us. We have a track record now, but that was one of the commitments that our board made early on, was that we would measure what we were doing. We've had a Department of Evaluation and Research since the very beginning, and we have tried to be as data-driven as possible. So you can measure some of those things if you're, investing significant dollars in some of these areas. It sounds like Anne Marie may be doing the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of cool that we have two organizations here represented, one who's got this track record and us starting where we are, because as I mentioned, I've learned so much from Palm Beach County. But something that we're doing here that is historic about really showing that we are moving the needle, our Kent County administration, our Kent County Independent School District, which is over the 22 school districts I mentioned, and our Kent County Health Department have all come together with my organization, First Steps, to say we are now going to share data. We're going to set up how we collect data. Everyone is invested here in showing that we are moving the needle. We want to make sure that this millage is successful, and it really is everyone linking arms and saying, for the first time ever, We're going to share data, and we're going to house it in the same place so that everyone has access to it. So it is a bit historic. And I think I mentioned in the presentation some of the areas that we're looking at. Randy mentioned them too, the healthy birth piece, but also being able to make sure, I think that big goal is kids being ready for kindergarten, many more than we have right now.
Great. And another question asks, I think this, Randy, this is about your presentation. So the question asks, you said organize a group of child and family advocates as one of your strategies for getting people on board. And that you also talked about separately reaching out to all groups and communicating to all populations to reduce opposition. How big exactly should this outreach group be?
Well, from what I could tell, there was a core group, and I don't know if this is what you would have to be successful, but what was successful, it seemed like there was really a core group of about 5 to 10 people that regularly were meeting, strategizing, and at times it may have been only 5 of those people that were really strategizing with the firm that was hired, really reaching out and asking some people for funds. The really hard work was generally a relatively small group. So you sort of have your strong advocates who really believe in what you're doing. They often would be people you might even want to be, depending on how your board has to be created. I know some of ours were some of our original board members as well. They are very passionate, and they see what you're trying to do, and they know what you're going to have to do as far as spending the funds and all of that. But then you kind of have this broader population that generally wants to do things for children or aren't going to be opposed to anything done for children. And I think what I was referring to is even though you know that, and even though there might be obvious groups like PTAs or any other group that might already be serving children, you still want to reach out to them and pull them in to support what you're doing. What you really want is the general message that is among the community is a certain level of excitement and looking forward to what you're going to create, so that it kind of counters anybody that has that undercurrent maybe of, well, I don't want another tax, or I don't want this. You almost want whoever they're talking to, or at least people they're talking to throughout the day, to at least say, well, yeah, but at least it's for children, or at least they have a plan of how they're going to spend it, or whatever those messages are that you're getting out there. So that's kind of what I meant about that larger group. But I would say when it comes to what I observed when it came to sort of that advocacy group at the beginning is it's a relatively small group that are very dedicated, and then they start to pull in more and more people who may be contributing in individual ways. Some may be giving money, some might be willing to go out and speak, some might be the street corner kind of person with a sign, but it's a core group that's really kind of driving the process.
Great, thank you so much. And I have one more question here. So what did it take in your community to get on the ballot? So, for example, Anne Marie, did you go through your city council or county commissioners? And Randy, was it, now that you guys did, you were like kind of refreshing it, how did that work?
Well, I can just tell you, we had to go through our county board of commissioners, and there are 19 of them representing all the regions of our county, and that's how we do it here in Kent County. But I will tell you, in Michigan, there are many different ways. For instance, there's another county that they would have to get signatures, or there's just other ways to do it. But in Kent County, we had to go through our board of commissioners and get approval, a vote by that board to be put on the ballot.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, and for us, what actually happened was the way the state law is written is that, at least was originally written, is that once you were created for good. And there was a group of legislators that, for a variety of reasons, were uncomfortable about local taxes and special taxing districts, and passed a law that we all had to go back to referendum again to exist. And we could choose at the time, if you didn't say it otherwise, then you would have to do that every 10 years. We, again, saw very strong support and strong polling information, so we wrote ours so that we would be permanent. So basically it was driven by the fact that the state legislature required that everybody had to go back, so then we went through the campaign process, but we did include the language, so hopefully we won't have to do it again. But, you know, every local government is really at the mercy of a state government, and so it could always happen again that the legislature would require us again to do it. We hope that the fact that we weren't the only ones that were overwhelmingly approved, but so we're kind of hoping that they would be seen as kind of a superfluous effort to go back and ask people when 85% of the people seem to be supporting what you're doing.
Great. That's wonderful. Well, I don't see any more questions in the question box. And Guzzy, did you see anything before I close us out?
No, I don't have anything else.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much to Randy and Anne-Marie for taking time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it. And I know we're going to get some final logos on the slides, and then we'll be able to post them on our website, and we'll send an email about that once they're posted. So thank you to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All
Bye.
right, bye-bye.